So let's go ahead and get started. Chat here so I can see that as well. Okay, so you want to start a garden. So there are lots of things that you need to know, but I tried to boil it down to 5 things that are really critical. The first thing that you need to know and consider is location. Just as any realtor knows, location is everything for a house. And I would say it might even be a little more important for your garden. So let's dig into this a little more and let you know what goes into a good location. Let's see. So let's look at this yard. This is kind of a typical housing arrangement. Think about where a good place for a garden would be. So some of the things that you might need to consider when putting in a garden, why don't you guys tell me what might be some of the things that you need to consider when putting in a garden? Go ahead and put those in the chat. While you're adding your comments, I want to mention that drawing a map of your yard is a really good idea. Taking that time to sketch it out on a piece of paper or in some sort of a drawing app, or you can get technical, you can put it on something like what I have here and have it drawn out formally. You can do something in PowerPoint. This map that I have on the screen, it is to scale. That's really helpful when you're trying to figure out what can fit and how many plants you're going to need and other resources. Okay, looking at what you have put in the chat, we have sun and drainage, water accessibility, soil, hours of sunshine. Wow, you guys are hitting it right on. So really good. All right, let's talk about this some more. All right, so some of the recommendations I have, they're going to be similar to what you guys have said as well. Let's talk about light. So light and shade or lack of light. This can come from other plants. It can come from structures. So we're talking about, again, light. We're talking about sunshade or the shade, sunlight and shade. What is already in your landscape? What areas are full sun? What are part shade? What are full shade? All of these are really important considerations because that's going to impact what can go there. The next thing, this goes with our shade, but what about sunlight? So what areas are really getting all of that full sun? There's nothing there to block it. We also need to consider orientation. So on this map, we have, it's oriented as north. North is up on the top. This is important because when the sun moves, well, when the earth moves, the sunlight changes. The exposure from the sunlight changes. So something that in the morning might be full sun, it might be full shade in the afternoon. So given the light considerations in this instance, where might be the best place for a veggie garden? Think about that. Just take a moment to look at this. So we're going to get to it in a minute, but this is the first major consideration. If I'm thinking like a vegetable garden, I'm going to have to be looking at sunlight, but then like you guys said, I'm also going to be looking at water and soil, drainage, traffic, and convenience. So for vegetables and for our fruits, they're going to take 6 to 8 or even more hours of sunlight per day to be able to produce as much as they can and also to be healthy. Some ornamentals will tolerate or thrive even in shade, like absolute, well, not absolute darkness, but in shade. So knowing exactly how much light you are getting is huge in figuring out where to put your garden. Many of our wildflowers also need full sun. So you're going to want to make sure that you are knowing you have to know what conditions are there, and we're going to talk about what plants to put in there later. All right, so on this particular map, this area right here seems to be the best place for a garden. So it gets over 8 hours of sunlight each day, which is really important for those vegetables and fruit. However, before I go and grab a shovel and basket of seeds, there are some other important considerations to consider about this location. You guys have mentioned several of them. So where are the traffic patterns in your yard? How convenient is this location? Is the back corner of your yard really the best place? I know people who that's the first place they think of, but it is actually pretty far away, and maybe the hose doesn't make it that far, or there's no water available out there. Do you really want to lug a whole bunch of watering cans all the way over there? What about utilities? Where are the utilities in your yard? Before you ever put a shovel in the ground, you need to call 811, or you need to get on their website and make that appointment to have them come out and flag your yard for utilities. It can take about a week to get the markers placed, so you might want to consider after we're done here to give them a call or to get online and to put in that information. It's really important to do this, even if you've done this before, even if you had them come and flag things before, because you might not remember exactly where things are, but also because if by any chance you were to hit a utility, and some of them are, 2 feet underground, some of them are like inches under the ground. If you were to whack one of those utility lines, you actually become responsible for having them fixed, and it can go into the thousands of dollars. So it's a free phone call. It's free for them to come out, and make sure that you do that before you put anything in the ground. Okay, so also knowing where your utilities are can influence how you do your garden. So very important to consider this when you are putting things in the garden. Maybe if in this case, and I think I have a slide here, but there are utilities that come right in this area. So maybe another consideration would be to use containers or raised bed gardens. So there are things that you can still do even if there are utilities, but it's really important to know about where they are. Okay, so let's continue to dig deeper and look more closely at some of the other considerations about your location. So we've mentioned water. Where are your water spigots? Watering adequately and correctly is so important for a vegetable garden and also for ornamentals. You have to water germinating seeds frequently and to keep the soil beds moist. For growing crops, you need to water thoroughly, and less frequently is better than shallow and frequently. So making sure that you have that water where it's practical, where it's easily accessible is very important. Okay, so next is your soil. Have you done a soil test recently? It seems like it might be, one extra step to do when we're talking about location, but it's really important. For your gardens, you want soil that is well drained. You don't really want wet areas in your yard, unless you have plants that really like wet soil, but most of our plants don't. So you might need to do a drainage test, which is like digging a hole, putting some water in there and seeing how fast it drains. You also want to be looking at the slope of your yard. So, a slight slope is okay, but not too steep. To get a soil test done, and most of us have like that Missouri clay, which is great, but we don't know about the pH or the potassium or phosphorus. All of those things are really important. So get that soil test done, and your local extension can accept soil tests, or you can send it in directly to our soil lab. It costs about $20. And it's worth it, because then you find out your pH, you find out what macronutrients and some micronutrients are in there, and that can help you know what plants will survive and thrive in your yard. And also it'll save you money in the long run by not having to add specific fertilizers that you don't need and actually could be harmful to your plants. All right, so we're back at this map, and the lone water spigot is right here by the house. So fortunately, if you had, in this case, with a hose, not too long, but like a 50-foot or a 75-foot hose, it's going to reach this area. So this does still seem like a pretty good area for a vegetable garden. Also, the soil test came back as slightly acidic. So that is going to guide what is going to go in the ground. So that could include blueberries. Pawpaws are going to be able to work here. If any corrections need to be made now that you have that soil test, then you're going to be able to take that into consideration so you can grow the healthiest garden possible. In this case, for the vegetable garden, it's mostly going to be raised bed gardens. So the soil in the vegetable gardens actually are going to be different than surrounding soil, but some of those shrubs and other kinds of ornamentals are actually going to be in the ground. So it was important to have that soil test. Also, the care and effort that we just put into finding the best spot for this garden bed, we're going to repeat throughout the yard for any other garden bed that we're going to put in there. All right, so what are some other things to consider? Again, you guys have mentioned several of them. You have to figure out what it is that you want to grow. Are you talking vegetables, flowers, shade garden? Like we said, some plants are going to want more light than others. Some plants need more water than others. You want to plant like with like. So that means plants that like a lot of water, you would want to put those with other plants that like a lot of water, or plants that are drought tolerant with other plants that are drought tolerant. And that's going to help keep things consistent in the various flower beds so that you can know what you need to do in each flower bed, and also help each plant to be healthy. You might also want to consider removing invasive plants such as Bradford pear, burning bush, and perhaps plant them with better suited plants. So when we're looking at this, we've put a lot into consideration here, the light for our vegetable garden, but there's a lot of other areas in the yard that can have that you would want to have plants. We talk about these things in some of our other programs like Extension Master Gardeners or Extension Garden Steward, and go into more detail. But this is such an important point. I wanted to make sure that we talked about it here, that that make sure that you get light and you get water taken care of, water access, really, really important. And before all of that, make sure that you have contacted 811 so that you can know where your utilities are and get that soil test done. All right. Also part of this right plant, right place, we're going to talk a little bit more about location. Our right plant, right place. We're zooming a little bit out from specific parts of our yard, and we're taking a wider view about where you are in the country. So what plant hardiness zone do you live in? So this is all about how cold it gets in the winter. Some plants can't tolerate cold temperatures and some absolutely can. This map right here is put out by the USDA, and it helps you know what zone you live in and what plants you might consider. So you'll want to pay attention to the weather in addition to this map, because some plants can handle a little frost, others can't. This zone helps you understand what the typical last frost dates are and the first frost dates are. Again, that's typical, but there are there's individual local weather patterns that can happen, and you could have microclimates in your yard as well. I'm here in Kansas City, and so I'm zone 6A. So that means that I can handle plants, or I can have plants that can handle frost and cold temperatures down to about 0 degrees. But if it gets much colder than that, then I might have more damage, or it might actually kill the plant. So let's talk about this in more detail. Right plant, right place. So knowing our zone is really important. And now that we know that, we've talked about sunlight and water and all of these things. There's still some more to understand about getting the right plants and understanding our location. All right, so another important part is considering appropriate plants. So we've talked about our location, we're talking about plants now. So some things to think about in the right plant, right place. Let's think about how tall are your plants actually going to get. So some plants are going to be really small, they could be inches, or they could be a couple feet, or they could be 90 feet or over 100 feet. What pH is necessary for your plants? What kind of soil are they going to want? Do they want sandy soil? Do they want clay soil? That's important. Are we going to need to amend the soil for them? We want to find plants that meet the parameters that we already have in our yard, or maybe only need a slight modification. This image on this slide is all about trees. And something that it does a good job of explaining about, you want to look at the mature height and width of plants as well. This is on a big scale with trees, but this also is really important when you're looking at like a vegetable garden or an ornamental garden. So in this case, we have a small tree that can get over 20 feet. It's also going to be small, so this would be an appropriate tree to put under power line compared to a tree like this that can get over 40 feet tall. And we wouldn't want a tree like this to be under a power line because it could put pressure on that power line, and that could be a dangerous situation. Also, it means that you'd have to spend a lot more on pruning that tree, which you could get away. Things would be better if you had planted a more appropriate tree. Again, in a vegetable garden, you're going to have a similar thing, just on a much smaller scale. On the back of your seed packages, there's a lot of information that talk about what size they're going to be in maturity. It seems when you put this teeny tiny little seed in the garden, it's very easy to put way too many of them thinking, well, the seed is so small. But if you put too many things in a small space and they do get to be 12 or 18 inches and then they're all crowded, then you're not going to have very good air circulation. And that can cause a lot of problems. So you need to understand the plants that you're putting in and how big they're going to get in order to make sure that you're creating a healthy situation that will be better for your plants, which means that you're going to be a happier gardener as well. So about planting, because this is the time to be planting now. You can plant, of course, by seed. Make sure you follow those directions. Some plants actually need to be just under the surface. Maybe it's 1/8 of an inch if they're really small. Your package is going to tell you. And some of them need to be 1 inch or more under the ground. A lot of people choose to use starts or transplants, and that's where you can do this on your own. You can grow these from seed at home. You would have probably started them a few weeks ago, or you can purchase them from a nursery. One thing that's really important if you are going to be planting these things is to plant them at the same level that they came. Don't plant them deep. Don't plant them too high. You want to plant them at the same level that they are in the package. There are a couple of exceptions to that, like tomatoes. You can actually plant them deep, but most plants you can't because it'll end up killing them. You'll end up with too much water near the stem of the plant, and it's not good for it. If it's too high, the roots can be exposed. That's not good. That causes stress to your plants, and when plants are stressed, that's when they start having more problems. So, all right. That's something else to consider when you're looking at plants and you're picking out plants. Choose plants that are disease resistant, if possible. Tomatoes would be a good example. They can be susceptible to a lot of diseases, but you can save yourself a lot of trouble if you were to plant or select plants that are resistant to many of the diseases that they have. So when you look at a tag and it has all of these extra little letters that you may not know what they are, but it says resistance, that's the one you want. You want them that they're resistant to a lot of the diseases. All right, so let's go on. Something else you might want to consider is keeping a garden journal. This is really helpful so that you know from year to year what you have, what you liked, what you didn't like, when pests arrived, or when they disappeared, so that you know how to prevent those problems next year. You also will want to know where you planted things because it's really good to rotate your crops. You don't want to plant your tomatoes in the same place every single year because even if they're resistant, they're not disease proof. And so you can actually have diseases build up in the soil, which can overcome that resistance. So you'll want to rotate your crops. And a journal is really helpful to remember where it is that you had your plants every single year. All right, continuing on the theme of right plant, right place, have some fun. I've just given you a lot of rules, but you also can have fun. And I chose this picture of a fig because figs are just barely hardy in my area. In fact, it'd probably be better if it were actually brought in to a protected area every single winter. But I had an area that I thought might be protected enough that it might be able to survive through the winter here. And sure enough, it does. So I tried something just a little bit out of the zone, and it actually works. So if you want to try something, be aware that it might not work, but failure is definitely a part of learning how to garden. So give it a shot, try it out, and it might work, it might not, but then you'll have learned something. All right, we are on tip number 3, which is 4 seasons. Here in Missouri, we have 4 seasons. You can plant for them all. Don't just don't just think that you can just have a garden in the summer. We are so blessed, I feel, to have these 4 different seasons, and you can have interest all year long. So, and I should have you guys put in the chat, what is your favorite season? What are your favorite plants to grow? Go ahead and put those in there. While you're doing that, I'm going to just keep on going and give you some ideas of things that you can plant in the spring, because we're still in spring. We're going into summer though, and then we'll have fall. And what works in the fall is what you would have been planting in the spring as well. So if you didn't get your spring garden in, that's okay. You have another season coming up. So I will put in the chat also a resource. At MU Extension, we have the vegetable planting calendar, which lets you know when you can plant things. This is really handy because you can see on here that we have a lot of cool season vegetables that you can grow. And some of these you can actually plant right in your garden, even as early as February. Who would have thought that you can really be planting in February? But there are some things that you can. Depending on how the local weather is, you might take a while for them to grow, but you can. Or if you put starts out in the garden, you can do that too. I love that you guys are putting things in here. Thank you for sharing some of your fun favorite plants to have in the garden. All right, let me actually get the link to the vegetable planting calendar so you have that. There you go. So you can take a look at that calendar. It's a really handy calendar. And just a tip on that, we do have a website that has all of this information, but there's also something that you can click for the PDF. And I always use the PDF because it's just easier to see these tables in the PDF. So that's another tip. All right, so some examples of some early spring garden vegetables, leafy greens that you can put in. These are typically planted in February and March. So these plants can tolerate cool temperatures, even a light frost, even a little bit of a freeze. So your lettuce and arugula, spinach, kale, cabbage, mustard green, and collard greens. There are quite a few things that you can have out there. You might want to use transplants that you purchased, or maybe you start these by seed indoors. Some things, again, you can actually plant directly in the garden, but it might take a while for them to start growing. Here are some other early spring plants that you can put in there, snow peas, some sugar snap peas. They might need trellising or some kind of support. Some actually don't need trellising or support, such as sugar ann is one variety. So you might want to try something like this out. So some late spring, so we're in late spring now. So these would be some things that you could actually still put in the ground. So your radishes, your icicle radishes, carrots, Swiss chard, broccoli, potatoes, and beets. So these are some of the plants that you'll see them again pretty soon when I'm talking about what you can put in the fall. But these are nice things that you could actually be planting right now. Just another heads up, you'll want to check on the back of a seed package. Usually they'll say when to plant. They also will say how many days until harvest. And so this is where your garden calendar comes in, or your garden journal comes in handy as well, because if you note when it is that you planted things, it'll help you know when it is that you should be harvesting them. All right, some challenges that you might have with the spring garden. It does get cold. And some plants, even though they can tolerate a little bit of a frost, you still might want to protect them. And you can do that by covering them. So you can get fancy and have hoops that you can put some covers over, or if you're in a pinch, you can grab a sheet or you can grab some towels. You might want to put something to try and protect them so it doesn't smash them. You don't want them to be wet. So like if it's raining, you want to try to protect them that way from freezing rain. Freezing rain, there's not a whole lot you can do to protect. But anyway, floating row covers are really nice. They can be left on for an extended period of time, but if you're using like a sheet or towels, you'll want to take those off so that they'll still be able to get some sunlight. All right. So let's go into summer. We are going to be there before you know it. So there are some crops that really need to have warm soil before you plant them. And there's some good tips on this slide. You can start these indoors. If you have a greenhouse, that's great. If you are starting these indoors, something that you're going to need to do is you're going to need to harden them off. So what that means, taking them outside when it's a bright sunny day or even a cloudy day. I like taking them out when it's a cloudy day to just give them a chance to get ready or to get used to those outdoor conditions. The sunlight is going to be much harsher outside. They need that extra sun, but it's going to be a big change from indoors, even if you have great lights. Also, that the wind and the movement is helpful to them. So make sure that you have hardened off your plants before you just put them in the garden. The hardening off process can take a few days, maybe even a week. Right, some of the, this is a late spring, but early summer as well. So this is mid-April, May, and June. So these are some things that you could be putting in right now as well. Your beans, some of the squash can handle a little bit of colder temperatures. Hopefully we're not going to get any more freezes, but I can't promise you that. Okay, so when we get, some people will wait until Memorial Day before they chance some of our plants, like our tomato type plants, and that would include eggplants and peppers and tomatillos. Those are all in the tomato family. Those can be very sensitive to frost. So you can probably try to plant them right now, but if you have to replant them because it gets cold again, that's the risk of planting them now. But if you wait until Memorial Day, you're going to have time for them to grow, so it'll be okay. Also, your melons, you'll be able to start planting your melons pretty soon. They also need that warm soil temperature, so that's why we wait until it's warmer for them to be planted. Now, just some tips on tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, since those are such popular plants. You need well-drained soil for those. Tomatoes, you can do transplants. They grow also very easily from seed. If you do have transplants, I mentioned earlier that you can actually plant them deep, and that actually gives them additional rooting space, which is really good for them. They do need full sun. They don't try growing them in shade. It's not going to work. And I also mentioned you need to be rotating your tomatoes, and that includes the entire tomato family. So your tomatoes, your peppers, eggplants, and tomatillos, those need to be rotated. So they're not in the same place every year. They need to be rotated on about a 3 or 4 year rotation schedule. For a vegetable bed, you probably also are going to want to add some extra organic matter to the soil. That would be compost, leaf mulch, manure, things like that, so that your soil is going to be really healthy. All right. So you had your fall garden, or your summer garden. You've been harvesting things. Now you get into fall. Well, not quite. Before it's actually fall, you need to start thinking about your fall garden. Because you'll actually plant your fall garden when it's still a little bit warm, but not too warm, so that these plants can start getting a little bit of growth and some of the green and get their roots established before we go into the colder season. So your fall garden is going to have the same kind of plants that you had in spring. So this is 3 seasons of vegetables that you can have in a garden. Which is just really good. It can be very productive to help feed your family or your neighbors, or perhaps you can be planting an extra row to help with the food pantry. So the challenges you're going to have for fall gardening are going to be the same as in the spring. Maybe one more that I've discovered is that sometimes it's just really hot outside when you're trying to get it started, and transplants actually might be helpful for a fall garden as well, because sometimes those cool season crops, they need the warm soil can be nice, but if it's too hot, like last year, it was just stayed hot for a long time and the seeds aren't going to grow. So transplants could be helpful there as well. All right, and just a final thought on vegetables and fruit. Make sure that you enjoy your harvest. You've gone to a lot of work to grow all of these plants, and sometimes we just get caught up in the excitement of gardening that we kind of forget to enjoy our harvest. So harvest at the right time. Pick vegetables and fruit at their prime and enjoy them. A good time to harvest is in the cool of the morning, when they have all the moisture. In the evening can work too, as long as just in the middle of the day, they sometimes can be stressed because there's just so much pressure on them with having to try and pull up all the moisture into the plant. So morning is good. Morning, I think, is best. Evening is okay. You'll want to shade the produce from the sun when you pick it, so you're not just leaving your basket outside. And then make sure that you are being safe when you're handling your food. So make sure you take the time to wash your food, wash your hands, and then store things in a proper location so that your food is safe. So I've talked a lot about the seasons for vegetable gardening, but with ornamentals, you also can garden for all 4 seasons. It's hard to do vegetable gardening in the winter here, but for ornamentals, you absolutely can make sure that you still have winter interest so that you have interest all year long. We have flowers, trees that flower in the spring, and lots of herbaceous perennials that bloom in the spring. Plants that bloom all throughout the summer, in early summer, late summer, midsummer. And then we have plants that are the most beautiful in the fall. And then we have plants that they are beautiful like grasses throughout the warm season, but also provide structure and visual interest in the winter. So grasses can be really good. There can be some perennials, you can leave their seed heads out, and it can just look beautiful, as well as provide habitat for wildlife that could really use the seeds that are still there. So keep all of those things in mind when you are figuring out what plants to put in your garden. That don't just buy it because it looks pretty in the nursery. Figure out where you want it in your yard. First of all, figure out where good places are in your yard to have the plants, and have a specific plant in mind to put in your yard where it's going to thrive. But think about the whole wide view of all the different plants that we have, the huge variety and diversity that is out there, so that you can have something that just really keeps your interest and your passion up all year long. All right, so we're on number 4 now. 4 is integrated pest management, or you're going to hear me say IPM a lot. What is integrated pest management? Let me tell you. Integrated pest management is a science-based approach that combines a variety of techniques. And some of these techniques are right here on this infographic. I like this infographic. It's from the Entomological Society of America, and it's handy in that it gives you all of the different things to keep in mind. I tend to think of this more as some of these are interactive instead of linear, but let's walk through what is on each one of these things. First of all, being able to identify what is out there. So when we're talking about IPM, we're talking about insects, we're talking about diseases, and diseases can be fungi or bacteria or nematodes or viruses. There are a lot of different things that can happen to our plants. This is planting the right plant in the right place. Why I took so much time to talk about that is one of the steps here. And it's actually up here at Prevent. When we want our plants to be the absolute healthiest they can be, and by putting the right plant in at the right place, that's going to prevent a lot of problems. But you still will have problems, and so that's why we're going to talk about IPM. Being able to identify, if you start seeing a problem, identify exactly what's going on. Just because you find an insect there does not mean it's causing the problem. A lot of people feel like, oh, there's a bug. What do I do to kill it? And I'm an entomologist as well as a horticulturist. And so when people find that out, those are the top two questions I get. What is this? How do I kill it? Those are not the right questions. The first one is, what is this? And then hopefully the next question is going to be, how can I learn more about it? Most of our insects actually are beneficial. If they're not beneficial, they might be neutral. Only 1% of insects are actually pests. So like I said, most insects are beneficial, and actually without the insects in our vegetable gardens, we're actually not going to get a very good harvest, because insects are essential for our gardens to be healthy. A lot of them are pollinators, and a lot of them are predators for the pests that we have. So being able to identify what it is that we're seeing is going to help us have a healthier garden, because we're going to protect the insects that are helpful and beneficial to our garden, in contrast to what might actually be causing the problem. All right, so the next step is evaluate. And just because there is a speck on something, maybe that is not actually a problem. Now on our food, we have to be very careful. Our food, we need to be very safe, and we want our food to be not contaminated or damaged. But there are a lot of things that can happen to our plants that maybe the damage isn't so significant that it would warrant an action step. So understanding what your threshold level is really important. There might be some damage, but is it enough to warrant an action step? This step right here, prevent. Again, we've talked about this a little bit. A big part of that is putting the right plant in the right place. There's also some other things that we can do to prevent damage. So planting resistant plants, if it's not even a problem, maybe it's a matter of when you plant something, or maybe it's a variety that blooms at a time that doesn't have pest problems. For example, I have some blackberries in my yard, and they are early blooming blackberries and early fruiting blackberries. So by having these early blooming, early fruiting blackberries, they avoid some of the problems of the flies and true bugs that can actually cause problems to them later in the season. Another thing, a lot of our pests will actually develop in the soil, and they'll overwinter in the soil. And then they will, as they become adults or maybe even in their juvenile forms, they'll need to crawl up this tree or plant in order to access the fruit. So we could actually put a barrier here that keeps them from being able to get up. So these are just some ways that we can actually prevent problems from occurring, rather than what most people think when they think, oh, I need to kill this insect, is grab a can of pesticide. Notice I haven't even brought up pesticides until just right now. And that's because there's actually still some steps between when you identify, when you've been evaluating and preventing, before you ever get to this action step. So an action step is where you actually need to go out and you need to do something to control a pest or some sort of a problem. So this might be, let's say you have Japanese beetles. A good action step for them is to pick them up and put them in a container of soapy water. So and if you do that early in the morning, then they're not going to be able to give off a pheromone later in the day to bring in many more of their species to come and feed on a great resource that you have in your yard. So being able to identify the pest is really important. Being able to understand its life history and habitat and characteristics will also help you be able to come up with an action plan that's appropriate. There may come a time where maybe a pesticide is what needs to happen to control the pest. There are some pests that are really, really challenging to control any other way. Now, when I say chemical control, keep in mind that could be organic or synthetic. They're both chemicals. But one thing you need to keep in mind is use the least toxic method that does the job. you also need to read that label. That label actually is a legal document. And so you need to follow it. There's been a lot of research put into those, and your labels will let you know about what insects that they can be used on. They talk about what kind of problems you can use them on, what kind of plants you can use them. They talk about personal protective equipment that you should use. You need to follow that. Like I said, it is a legal document. It is the law. So make sure that you follow that. All right, so let's say you've gone through all these steps and you've taken care of your problem and you're not done yet. You need to keep monitoring. You need to keep on this, making sure that you are helping your plants to be as healthy as possible so that you can, again, continue to prevent future problems, and being able to be on it with the first moment that any problem comes up. Question about whiteflies. Whiteflies are a problem. Whiteflies are attracted to yellow, so those yellow sticky pads can be very helpful, both as a way to monitor when you actually have them show up in your garden, as well as they are a control method. Whiteflies also are a small insect that can that a lot of our biological controls will eat. So ladybugs can be helpful, green lacewing. There are quite a few different biological controls that help there too. If you can try and stay on it at the beginning, that can help you later on in the season. Just so you know, we have a lot of resources with MU Extension for some of these things. So I make sure that if you do have any additional questions like this, I may not be able to answer them all here, so I have very limited time with you, but I'm going to give you my contact information after so that you'll be able to reach out to me, or your local extension specialist to be able to solve any problems that you have. Okay. So some additional information about pests, because like I said, you will have pests. You definitely are going to want to monitor your crops. Get out there every day if you can. Look under the leaves, because a lot of insects will actually be under the leaves. You'll want to check for anything that looks off. So these are some insects that definitely cause problems: loopers and squash bugs. These are squash bug nymphs. Potato bugs, this is spotted cucumber beetle and striped cucumber beetle. A lot of these actually can have multiple names. And so sometimes we'll also use scientific names to make sure that we're talking about the correct insect, but understanding exactly what it is really important. This kind of looks like a ladybug, which is beneficial, but this is not a ladybug. It's spotted cucumber beetle, which actually can be a real problem. It can devastate crops. But a lot of us think about insects as pests, but like I've said, only 1% of insects are pests. Most of our insects are actually not beetles, but most of our insects are actually beneficial. So these are some beneficial examples. We have a dung beetle, we have a parasitic wasp, and we have honeybees. Honeybees are not the only kinds of bees. There's lots of native bees that we have that are pollinators. So these are very important insects to have in our garden. We want to have these in our garden, and by creating a healthy environment in our garden for these pollinators and for these predatory beneficial insects, it also creates a healthier environment for us. Do you want to spend some time on plant diseases as well? So this triangle right here is important. I want you to, it may be hard for you to see on your screen, but in order to have plant diseases, you have to have all three of these parts. You have to have a susceptible host, you have to have a favorable environment, and you have to have a pathogen. I'll just let you know, for the most part, pathogens are there. We can't do anything about that. So there's something we can do here. So we've mentioned a few times that having a plant that is resistant to disease is really important. If your plant is resistant, then it's less likely to get a disease. If you can plant things in the right place, right plant, right place, Then, and you're creating this favorable environment, you're not putting them too close together. You've made sure that they're getting enough sunlight. You made sure that they have the right pH, they're getting enough water. All of those things are really important. And when you've done that and they have a favorable environment, they're going to be less susceptible to disease. So when, like I said, you have to have all three of these to have a disease. If you can get rid of any one of these, then you won't have a disease. So make sure that you are planting the right plant in the right place for the best chance of success. So here's that infographic one more time. I put a link in the chat for you to have it, so you can get it if you feel like that would be helpful for you in your garden. I recommend it. I use it all the time in my presentation, so I am seeing it all the time too. Okay, another challenge that you could have, weeds. Weeds are definitely a challenge, and sometimes I think we might get a little bit overboard with weeds. So I mean, things don't have to be absolutely perfect, but and sometimes a weed is just a flower out of place, and I totally get that. I like to have flowers in my lawn, for example. Like I actually put clover in my lawn so that I would have more flowers and more bees in my yard. I don't mind a little bit of henbit. I don't mind, some of these little weedy flowers that get in there, because for me, it just means more flowers and they're free and they're happy there, which the bees like. However, when we have vegetable gardens, it can be a problem. So having lots of weeds, that does mean that these things that we're not wanting to use for food, let's say, they can be using up resources that our plants would be needing. So they can drain some of the nutrients from the soil, or drain the water, or not drain necessarily, but pull it out of the soil so it's not available to the plants we want. So that can be a problem. Some of them also can be reservoirs for disease. They can harbor insects or other arthropods that will eat our plants. So sometimes some of those weeds that are out there, it is good to manage those and keep them away so that it's not causing more of a problem. In this picture, you can see that there's a lot going on there. So this is an example of too many weeds. This also would, there's not enough airflow that's going through there. So that's another reason why weeds in this case would be a problem. So what do you do about weeds? Lightly cultivating between the soil is good. You don't need to plow all the time. That can actually ruin your soil structure. But, just taking them from the top. Just try and cut those weeds off at the top. Works well. You can hand pull. Also, using mulch is really effective. Not just a light barrier of mulch, but using a couple inches of mulch to be able to keep the weed population down. That can be very helpful. We do have publications on different kinds of mulch that you can use. So I will try and drop that in the chat if I have that. If not, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a whole bunch of links that are helpful, and I'll put them on the recording on the YouTube channel. So you'll be able to go back and you'll be able to see all the different resources that are available. Okay, we've covered a lot. There are entire courses on these things that we've talked about. And that, so I realize that this is a lot, especially if you are a new gardener. So I just want you to know our fifth thing is you are not alone. There are a lot of resources out there so that you do not have to make this journey alone. There's no reason for that. Gardening is a social sport. There are so many people who want to help. There are a lot of passionate people about gardening that would love to help you out. Just keep in mind your local extension. So here in the Kansas City area, I am a horticulture specialist, and this is what I do. I am here to help people be able to succeed with their gardening. So if you have questions, it might not be me that you talk to, it might be my horticulture instructor, or it might be the Extension Master Gardeners that have a hotline. I do recommend contacting an Extension Master Gardener at the hotline because they have been trained and they want to help you as well. We also have other programs, like here in the Kansas City area, we have a speakers bureau that if you are part of a group that want to learn more about gardening, you can always call them and have them come out and give a talk about a gardening subject. So I put some links on the screen so you can learn more information about those resources or know how to get a hold of me. I do realize that there's this thing called the internet. People like to look up their information, and I think that's wonderful. There are some good ways to get good information, because all you have to do is it just takes one time for you to type in a problem and just be overwhelmed with all the information that's out there. Some of it is good, a lot of it is less good, let's say. So here's just a tip to be able to filter through all of that and make sure that you get solid research-based information. When you put in your search term, add this right here, site://.edu. That's going to give you a university that does research. So like if here, the example site://Missouri.edu, that's going to bring you to University of Missouri publications, so that you'll have information that is for this local area that can help you best solve your quandaries. If Missouri doesn't have it, I would recommend looking at a local or a nearby state like Kansas or Iowa or Illinois, just because they're going to have similar conditions. So the information will probably apply to you as well. .gov sites also are research-based typically, so good information there. Sometimes .org sites are good as well. Not all the time, there may be less research-based, but sometimes they can be really good. I also recommend maybe taking another class if you're interested, or participating in one of the different programs that we have. So we have the Garden Hour with MU Extension right now during the growing season. That's every week on Wednesdays at noon. It's free. You can just ask questions. You can actually drop your question in at this link, and we just made it so that you can actually add a picture if you have questions. So you can be a part of that. You can take a class. We have different types of classes. We have the Extension Master Gardener training, which is about a 3-month-long training. And then there's volunteering that you do. So you get to work alongside other Extension Master Gardeners and learn from them, as well as build a relationship with fellow gardeners. We also have a Missouri Master Naturalist course that is really great. It's less on like your vegetable gardening and more about wildlife, but it's also getting outdoors. There's also the Master Pollinator Steward class, which is more about our pollinators. So you learn about bees, both honeybees and our native bees, and about plant insect interactions and how it all comes together and how we can be stewards of our world around us. The Extension Garden Steward course is another class. It's 5 weeks, and it is really about how to do vegetable gardening, but also do it as an environmental steward. Both the Master Pollinator Steward and Extension Garden Steward courses do not have a volunteering requirement, so that seems to work better for folks that may not be able to, that may still be working full-time or have other interests. So we have a lot of different possibilities if you have more information. I just wanted to make sure that you knew that there were other resources available. Also, I am going to give you a link to this site that I just put together a whole bunch of links that people commonly are asking me about. So I'll put that in there so that you can have all of these resources at your fingertips. All right, and let me just make sure that I might have to wait just a second. So I'm seeing too many things, but I will give you that link. So there you go, 5 things to start gardening. And I did throw in a few extra ones in there, but all of these are really important. Before you leave, I do just want to ask if you could please fill out a survey for me. This is an anonymous survey that will help me be able to know what you learned and how I'm doing and how I can make this a better program for other people who go through it, because I just want people to know how to garden. So if you are able to, just click on that link and go, and it takes less than 5 minutes to fill it out, and it really does help me out. Okay, so that's it. I do have some other things other resources that I can put in the chat, and I will do that. I will stick around for a little bit if you guys have any questions, and feel free to go to the YouTube channel if you want to, if there's something that you missed, and I will be putting all of these links in the discussion or the See More section, so that everything's there. I don't want you to miss anything. Anyway, thank you all so much for being here. I'm so glad that you want to have a garden, and feel free to reach out to me if you do have any questions.